Welcome to Living a Full Life podcast. Join us as we explore health topics that encourage raising healthy children, living a healthy life, and living the best life possible. Now, here's your host.
Hey everyone, welcome to another podcast of Living a Full Life. Today is a very special guest, Dr. Fiona Lovely from Calgary, Alberta. I know a lot of Canadian connections in these last few podcasts, but this is going to be a cool one about menopause. You can actually follow her podcast if you find this interesting at Not Your Mother's Menopause Podcast. Search that. It's on all platforms. You can do that, and then she's all over social media. We'll tag all that. Thanks, Fiona. Thanks for being here.
That's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing for the great community of Calgary.
Practicing almost 20 years at this point, most of those years in Calgary. And of course, that's how we met, as we met in school all those years ago. Seems like forever, doesn't it? Like a lifetime. Always had an interest in women's health. And so I started my functional medicine training while I was still a student, chiropractic student. And I now practice through that lens and with the principles of functional medicine. And that's essentially looking at the root cause of disease. And my specialties, if such a word is allowed, is women's health around perimenopause or the midlife menopause transition, and brain health for women.
Very cool. Very cool stuff. Of course it's allowed. I mean, we all have, as practitioners, as doctors, as teachers, we all have our loves and our passions, and you can call that whatever you want. Your specialty, your focus, your primary, whatever it is. I think that's perfectly fine. Let's dive into menopause. I'm going to probably be quiet for about 20 minutes here and let the expert talk on menopause. But we have so many patients that listen, so many people, not just patients, they're not even my patients, that listen, that are female in that demographic, the 40 plus crowd, that, want to talk about it. And the medical route isn't exactly, responsive. It's like, well, yeah, it's normal. Congratulations for making it this far. Here's some meds. Let's look at your thyroid. And that's about it. That's as far as it goes. I know my mom dealt with it. It still deals, the whole time, and doesn't sound fun. But yeah, tell me about how, a different perspectives, like someone like you can actually listen.
Yeah. Thank you for asking the question. So menopause can be a terribly confusing time for women, and it starts much younger than we think it does. And so we need to be thinking through the lens of the hormone transition, even as early as 35. So 35 to 45 is when the menopause transition starts, the perimenopause. You can use those two words interchangeably, or those two terms. 35 to 45 is when it starts, and it typically ends around last menstrual period, around 52 is the average year, and the end of the menopause transition is somewhere in the 50s or early 60s. But then a woman potentially spends 40% of her life in menopause, which is kind of new. So it hasn't been that many generations where women lived long past menopause, like just essentially the last 100 years or so. So it really is a matter of how are we looking at women's health? It's not just the bikini medicine, which are the parts behind the bikini. It's actually looking overall and saying, what's the brain doing? What's the heart doing? How are the bones? All of these things really, and of course the hormones, and of course the endocrine system. These are all parts of it. But it's a big conversation to be had. And it turns out that we're entering a really cool era around menopause transition, which is we have new research that is showing new treatment options, and we have better understanding of the physiological principles, processes that happen behind menopause. And because of that, we have new treatment options as well, which is nice. And it's interesting. It took women driving this research by women for women, which I think is just absolutely fascinating. So this is a big conversation. There's lots of threads that we can pick up. So where would you like to go?
100%. I mean, because of the demographic dealing with it, what are some things they can start with on their own to deal with the major symptoms that come with menopause? I mean, the popular ones, the hot flashes, the heat, the temperature control, The hormone, I mean, the mood swings that come with it as well, for feeling uncomfortable and going through those swings all the time, almost like pregnancy all over again.
Yes.
That's what I hear. So I'm a good listener too, even though, my demographic is all women. I'm a good doctor. I listen to this stuff. So, what could they do? Maybe starting right now, today, maybe you can leave them with a tip where they can start and then start diving a little bit deeper and understanding that, hey, maybe there is a recluse to this. Maybe there is a way I can be comfortable through this.
Yeah. So I think the first thing to do is to really look at it from an overview rather than one of the ways that we have traditionally looked at menopause is to pick apart the different symptoms. Is it hot flashes? Is it cognitive decline, brain fog? Is it insomnia? Is it vaginal dryness? All of these things are very, very common. And so rather than just picking and pieces and parts, why don't we look at it as the overview? And I think that's part of what we're learning right now through this new sort of era of research is to say, okay, what's driving all of those symptoms? It's not just the thyroid. It's not just the hormones. It's all of the things together. So what is it that you can look at to start to treat the symptoms? First of all, inflammation is such a big part of what happens with women in the menopause transition. The egress of hormones triggers an inflammatory response above and beyond what a woman may already be experiencing. So controlling the mechanism of inflammation, and as you know, we talk about this with patients all the time, whether it's pain they're having or they're having gut issues or sleep issues or mood issues, whatever, not just in the menopause transition. And so how can we look at that and say, well, what are the levers we can pull in our own lives to reduce the inflammation? And the first thing, and probably the most important one, and the one that gets brushed aside the most, is looking at your stress management. Now, I can hear the eyes rolling when I say that. So let me break it down a little bit differently. So the stress management piece, listen, stress isn't going away. It's part of the lifestyle that we have chosen in our societies, in our communities. But what you can't manage that. But what you can manage is how you respond. So having tools that allow you to access calm and peace and relaxation in any moment are critical. You literally need to have them in your back pocket ready to go. And, it's interesting. I've been teaching the calming techniques, whether we can talk about polyvagal or it's somatic experiencing, or in functional neurology, we call it mesencephalic windup. It's part of how this cascade works. And then, of course, the autonomic nervous system responds with a stress response, of which inflammation is part of it. We can call it a number of different things, but it's actually quite simple and trivial things you can do to calm. You can have nice deep breathing. If you exhale longer than you inhale, that tells your brain that there is not stress, there is not threat, you're calm. That's parasympathetic. You can have slow strokes of your arms. That's very calming. Of course, you can meditate. Exercise is an excellent way to trigger a parasympathetic response. But here's something really important about exercise. It's not I need to kill it. I need to do all the hard stuff. It's the something pleasurable. And what's really interesting is the research shows the best thing you can do to prevent Alzheimer's is partner dancing. Isn't that fascinating?
That is super fascinating.
Yeah. So you think about the physiology behind that. You go, and the biochemistry and the neuro stuff it's just so interesting. So what's pleasurable? Wow. And even better if you can do it with a partner that you have a safety co-regulation with already.
Wow,
so
very cool.
Yeah, looking at the stress, really, really important. And of course, the next lever you can pull in inflammation is diet. And I hope we are educated enough as in our societies to understand that if what you choose to put in your mouth is what manifests physically and what manifests emotionally. And it is as simple as that. And we can make 1,000 excuses for it and it's fine. But like 80-20 rule, right? Like if you're doing the right stuff 80% of the time, don't sweat the 20%, right? But these things really help to control the inflammation. But the next piece about the diet and inflammation is looking at what your blood sugar is doing and blood sugar regulation. So this is not just a conversation for diabetics. This is a conversation for literally every person. And this is certainly true of every woman. So what affects the blood sugar? It's stress, it's the diet, it's inflammation cascades, it's what are the adrenal glands doing, all of those things. Some of those words are like, I don't know what that means. Okay, don't worry about that. So what can you do for this in the moment? Well, again, you can regulate your stress. You can make sure that you're eating things in the appropriate order. For example, if you choose to have something carby at dinner, fine. Eat your veggies first, because if you put fiber in the tank first, you slow burn those carbs, and then you don't have the spikes of blood sugar. Mm-hmm. So these things are all really important for inflammation. So, inflammation is kind of the big thing that we're at the moment learning about, how, what are the triggers for the menopause symptoms. So those are some fairly simple things that, simple, all of them, but diet.
Yeah. Stay tuned. The next episode is called inflammation. I spent a whole half an hour doing it. So there you go. We're going to deep dive in inflammation. So thanks for the segue into that.
No problem.
Yeah, no, it is. It is a deep dive. So, great tips. Look what you can do physically to help, endocrine wise or hormone wise or internally with that. That's amazing. And I love how you touched on exercise, not high intensity. That's a different goal for a different thing. The low intensity, methodic exercise, Tai Chi, yoga, dancing, Zumba, that type. Well, Zumba can get kind of aggressive too, but those things, those low, steady cardiovascular exercises for circulation, and it has a hormone effect to it, unlike heavy lifting or CrossFit or high intensity, where we're really stressing the hormone system on purpose for muscle growth and yada, 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 but not exactly the best time of life to be doing that kind of stuff when you're struggling with the other cascades that are happening. That's cool. Awesome stuff.
Yeah, but there is very much a place for resistance training and muscle building for women in perimenopause. Number one, it helps with bone health. Number two, it helps with heart health. It helps with visceral fat, which is one of the things that gets deposited during the menopause transition. It's a very common thing I hear about from women is, why all of a sudden am I putting on weight around the middle? And we know visceral fat is a risk factor for inflammation. So being able to target that. So there is a place for it. But again, I think the key is do it in a way that is pleasurable for you.
Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's got to be pleasurable for sure. Something you enjoy doing. That's great. Perfect. And what do you find once you start helping women, the biggest misconceptions they may have, or the biggest things that for you as a doctor, I don't know if this happens. I do know this happens to you as a doctor, when you're so surprised that the simplest things that you give your patients are the biggest life changers to them. We always think diet, exercise, elimination, yada, yada, yada. And it's so simple for us because we do it so repetitively to help people. What are things that you run into with your patient base in this category that you're like, yeah, I got to say these two tips because it happens all the time?
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. So first thing I want to say is Occam's razor says the principle in nature is the thing that's the simplest explanation with the least number of parts is most likely the correct answer. And I see that show up in medicine all the time. We go with the simplest things. Are you drinking enough water? If you're not drinking somewhere between 2 and 3 liters a day, you're not doing well enough. So that's really critical, especially if you have joint pains, which are something that is very, very common for women, or you're suffering from headaches. Hey, it could just be a hydration problem, boo. That's the easiest thing, and it's free. Just make sure you're drinking enough water. So another thing I like to recommend is fiber. So women there's a number of things that happens with the hunger mechanism, with the blood sugar regulation mechanisms, etc., during the menopause transition that we really can benefit from having enough fiber in the diet. And that's not something that a lot of women look at. We just kind of go, oh, that's for old people that are constipated or whatever. Or if you happen to have had constipation, which is very common for women, then you've probably had some sort of conversation with a healthcare provider about it. So you want minimally 25 grams a day of a mixture of soluble and insoluble fiber. So what I recommend is you use your food tracking app, set it for fiber at 25 milligrams. No, it's grams, sorry, grams a day, and then see how you measure up. And if you don't measure up, then you can add in a fiber supplement. And there are much better options than the everybody knows brand name that you can buy at the drugstore that has aspartame in it. Please don't do that. Literally, you can go to here in Canada, I'd say go to the bulk barn, but go to your bulk food store and get psyllium husks. Cheap as anything, and you can just add them to water, stir it in, pound it. Just the other thing is, if you're taking a fiber supplement, you must make sure you're hydrated. Otherwise, it will plug you up. So the thing about fiber, I have seen that work so well for a number of the menopause symptoms. And one of the things it works exceptionally well for is women who don't sleep through the night. Okay, who would associate fiber with insomnia? Right? Wow. Exactly.
Yeah.
So quite often that's a blood sugar issue. Women will have a spike of cortisol in the night because they don't have enough. The blood sugar's gone down and the brain goes, we need fuel. So let's kick the adrenals a little bit and see what happens. And then you wake up and you may not perceive hunger, but that is so often the case. Now, the bigger antidote to that is intermittent fasting done for a woman's body. Most of what is out there about IF is male centric. So a woman has to fast differently than a man. But to go back to the blood sugar bit. So if you take a fiber supplement, let's say before your last meal, depending on when you eat, depending on when you go to bed, there's a number of different subjects we could talk about there, but it actually will help you slow burn that last bit of fuel. And if you happen to be fasting, that can be one thing you do as you close your eating window, is to take a fiber supplement.
Great tips. Now, fasting is different for women and men. Oh boy.
Yeah.
Tell me about the women part. The men we got down. I mean, this may play a huge role because I coach on weight loss as well. And I am guilty of following the same fasting rules for everyone, except windows for like previous alcoholics and stuff like that, where you need to shorten the window because you got to help the liver a little bit. Other than that, tell me about the women. What's going on? What do they need to do for fasting?
Yeah, you got it. This is such a thing that I saw so often with women. And listen, we can get triggered into punishing ourselves with food so quickly that we have to be so careful about how, as healthcare providers, how we dispense that information. First thing is, intermittent fasting is excellent for brain health and body health, blood sugar, all of those things, weight loss, you name it. However, and in fact, it's been in the literature, it's been in the medical literature for 100 years, but it's all been research done using a man's body. So a woman's body uses resources differently. First thing I want to say is, a man has a 24-hour body clock. A woman has a 30-day body clock. So that's, and here we are, women living in a world that works on a 24-hour clock, right?
Wow.
So you have, fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
Did you say this was just 20 minutes?
No. We average 20 minutes. I think we're going to be here for a few hours, but that's okay. That's all right.
So first of all, there is an entire podcast episode on my Not Your Mother's Menopause podcast about fasting for women. Actually, there's two episodes. One is fasting for libido. We can talk about that one. That one's quite an interesting conversation. And there's a one that talks about how a woman needs to fast differently than a man. So first of all, if you're pregnant or lactating, no fasting. It's no bueno, off the table. Okay. A woman should not fast any longer than 18 hours. Okay. So that's really important. Never during your period, never during ovulation. The early part of the cycle, which is the follicular phase, that's the estrogen phase, that's when you can do those longer fasts. That's also when you'll notice that your ability to get stuff done is far greater during that time. Whereas in the second half of the phase, second half of the cycle, so now day one of the cycle is your bleed. Okay. Day one of the bleed is day one of the cycle. So during the luteal phase, or the second 14 days ish, okay, we're going with a 28-day average. That is when you want to have the shorter fasts. The other thing that's really critical is that a woman should not fast more than 3 out of 5 days. So she should be alternating, like never 2 days in a row. So she should be alternating her fast. There's a lot to unpack there. So do you want to take it away?
I'm trying to compact that because we want to bring value in a short amount of time. So with fasting, the rule is, I love the 18-hour because I max it at 16. I like it's just easy. Unless you're a shift worker, skip breakfast. I think in our life and the way we go, it just works out better. You eat sometime at 10, 11, 12 for your lunch and just finish it up around just an 8-hour window of eating. I think it keeps you out of trouble. It gives you a 16-hour window of fasting. Now, what Dr. Lovely's saying is we never want to do that for 5 days in a row. So women, listen up. We need to have breakfast. You throw the breakfast back in every other day.
That's right.
Does that sound like a good
That's
rule?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. And I want to add a little piece to that. So remember that when you're planning your eating window, you can move it around and move it around depending on your lifestyle. Like for me, I eat early and I close my window at about 2:00 in the afternoon. And then I have my coffee when I get up at 5, exactly how I like it, creamy and sweet. So, but there are lots of coffee tricks if you're not wanting to do the fast in the morning. As you know, there's lots of tricks. I'm sure you teach them. But one of the things that's really important is that women have chronic adrenal fatigue. And so, and especially this is true at the menopause transition at midlife. So the research shows that we do better with an early eating window because it's less taxing to the cortisol cascade, the HPA axis. It's less taxing, which dysregulation of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis is the next piece to menopause after inflammation. So we've got inflammation, we've got the HPA axis problem, and then all the symptoms branch out from those two things. So women not only should follow a different schedule, and we can throw actually the moon cycles in with that too, which maybe we'll do that next time. But a woman does better actually eating earlier in the day. It's easier on our systems.
Makes so much sense. The women struggle with this intermittent fasting. And it's not that because they like breakfast or eggs. It's just, Fiona, wow. I am so glad we did that. I'm going to be a better doctor. This is great. That's fantastic. If you're listening, if you're listening to this, that's really cool stuff. So it's so important. The women's body is completely different. I think all of medicine has been done on men. I mean, let's just be honest. The entire literature was male doctors calling in male patients and then documenting for centuries that way. And unfortunately, we haven't taken the time to really dissect, not literally, women's medicine, and how it's supposed to go through there. So that's super fascinating stuff too.
And I want to say two things about that. The first thing is, do you remember learning about thalidomide when we were in school?
Yes.
Okay. So basically what happened is it's a anti-nausea medication. Women were given it in the 60s for morning sickness. And what ended up happening was these horrific babies being born without arms and limbs. And not only that, but the changes that were done to the DNA from the thalidomide last at least 2 generations, meaning that the grandchild of a woman who had taken this medication in the 60s could be born with the same defects. So it was an absolute shit show, if I can speak that way, for medicine. And what happened was medical research went, women are too unpredictable. We can't have their bodies as part of the research. So we're just not going to do medical research on women. Even the female Viagra was tested primarily on men. So when your doctor is dosing you for whatever medication, chances are that dosage is based on a man's body and not a woman's body. And we know that a woman's body does a metabolic thing totally differently.
Yeah.
Second thing I want to say to you is that women's pleasure anatomy was not even in the anatomy textbooks until the 90s.
That explains a lot.
It does, doesn't it? We can talk about that one.
That explains everything. I mean, yeah, okay. There we go. Yeah, wow. Okay, so yeah, I mean, we can go through the history. I mean, it's gruesome. It's absolutely gruesome. But we're changing that. We're changing that one step at a time. I'm glad we're here now and doing these things and being aware of this stuff and listening to women. I mean, they don't have a voice and they come in distraught all the time, not because they're women, but because no one's listening to them. No one really knows what's going on. And they say you're fine. But anyways, I got 4 girls in this house, my wife and so we get it. That's awesome. That's awesome stuff. What else do you see in your patient base that, I mean, this is great. I mean, you just gave them 100 tips on what you can do to be healthier. Glucose, that's a huge one. I didn't know if we were going to get into that or not, but I mean, but even the fiber.
Yeah.
Fiber.
Fascinating, isn't it?
It's super fascinating, and how you brought it up with regulating blood glucose, when to take it, and being hydrated with it. Because I'll be honest with you, the only reason I ever bring in fiber is to get people to go to the bathroom.
That's right.
But once they start eating better, they get more fiber, and then they can't go to the bathroom, and that's a hydration problem. So it's like this negative feedback loop. So great way tying that all together.
And if I can add something there, it's not only 25 grams of fiber a day. Make sure you're getting enough protein, because one of the things that happens is women start to put on weight, as I talked about with the visceral fat deposition, is that we tend to use food for comfort. And to be perfectly honest with you, most of the food we use as comfort is not protein, it's carbs. So we can feel full, but we cannot be nourished. And, that's a big conversation, but generally the rule for protein is you want ideal body weight, same number of grams. So if it's 150 pounds, then it's 150 grams of protein a day.
Good rule. I like that. Makes it simple. Thank you, Dr. Lovely. This is great stuff. Definitely follow her. I mean, look at this. Look at her knowledge. This is fantastic. She's at Fiona Lovely and at Dr. Fiona Lovely on social handles, especially TikTok, Facebook, her podcast. I'll put them all in the links. Most people are audio listening to this. If they go onto YouTube, they'll see our beautiful faces. But other than that, thank you so much. We got to do this again.
I would love to.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me.
See ya.
Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Living a Full Life podcast. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. That helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.